Thank you. It's an honor to be here. I'm sorry my Spanish is terrible, so I will have to do this in English, but Santi can interpret for me. But thank you for having me here. It's an honor to be in Mexico City. I've never been in Mexico City before. I've been to Mexico a lot. I've lived in Texas my entire life, so I've made lots of trips to Mexico, but never to Mexico City. So it's a great honor to be here. I'm going to talk a little bit about how training has changed in robotic surgery and a little bit about my experience as it relates to use of surgical robotics. If you look at how often robotic surgery is being done around the world, every 36 seconds now a surgeon starts a robotic case, so it's grown a lot. And by the end of this year, last year in 2017, 875,000 robotic procedures were done. And there's only one company that's really out there doing it right now. And Dr. Osorio did a great job of showing all the other companies that are going to be coming out with platforms. He hit almost all of them that are working on things. Santi, I'm sure will flesh that out even further. But this year it'll probably be over 1 million cases. And I think in the next 2 to 3 years, as more of these platforms come out, we'll see a rapid growth. But over 5 million cases have been done. And we're now at the point where we'll see 1 million cases a year. And the fastest growing population, robotics began with gynecology and urology, specifically urology and then gynecology. It was originally set up to be for cardiac surgery, but didn't really pan out very well there. But the urologists took hold of it, and then the gynecologists got trained, some effectively, some less effectively. But now general surgery is the fastest growing specialty in all the specialties in general surgery, the fastest growing specialty in robotics. And as a surgeon that does a lot of foregut and bariatric work, I also do a decent amount of hernia work. And I've more or less pulled away from doing a lot of colorectal work because we have a big colorectal group now. Now they actually care about foregut surgery and bariatric surgery. And it took them a while to even care about hernia surgery, but now they do. So they're actually proactively trying to train and educate surgeons who want to learn robotic bariatric surgery, robotic foregut surgery, robotic hernia surgery, and you can see that the growth is there. Now, there's been lots of complaints about problems with the robot. One of the biggest and valid complaints is the cost. And when you look outside the United States, the costs even go up higher in international markets. But I think these platforms are going to continue to grow, and costs and the way robotics gets billed to the patients, gets billed to the hospitals, is going to change quite a bit. So, but yes, there's still a lot of challenges to growth of robotic surgery. Incisional hernias have been growing rapidly. Inguinal hernias have been growing rapidly, which I didn't really predict, but but it's also growing in foregut and bariatric surgery. Our practice is grown actually with robotics. As I've been there, we had about 3 surgeons that did elective general surgery at the University of Texas in Houston, and now we have 32 in six sections: colorectal, breast, endocrine, surgical oncology, bariatric, reflux and foregut, and then hernia and abdominal reconstruction. And of those 32, these are the guys and gals that do robotic surgery on a regular basis, and that number continues to expand. And we have 6 fellowships with over 12 fellows in our practice, and all of those, with a few exceptions, get trained to do robotic surgery. So about 2/3 of our surgeons in bariatric foregut, colorectal, and surgical oncology are using the robot on a regular basis for their cases. This is kind of my experience over the last 15 years. I started doing robotics in 2002 and just never really stopped. And so people often ask, why do I do what I do? And these are kind of the things I've come down to. I really abhor complications. So if something gives me an edge, then I want to use it. And I think with good training, robotics can do that. I like to hand sew. I do use staplers, but I like to hand sew an anastomosis. I'm kind of control freak. And if you hand sew an anastomosis, I really feel that if it goes wrong, if it leaks, you really have no one to blame but yourself. And so I like that. That makes me feel comfortable, because I feel like I like that pressure on me and not have to worry about whether something else can do the job or not. I like to be in control of the operation. Like I said, I'm a control freak. I like to do the same operation regardless of whether the patient has a favorable body habitus with a little bit of abdominal fat and a little bit of abdominal wall thickness, or very large, thick abdominal wall. I really don't feel like you have to make compromises, and shouldn't have to, and I think robotics helps with that. I want to have a long career. I've never had any real problems with major joint issues, but bariatric surgeons, there's survey data that shows bariatric surgeons, 2/3 of bariatric surgeons and more than half general surgeons have some type of musculoskeletal problem associated with them operating on a regular basis. And probably everyone in this room knows somebody that's had carpal tunnel surgery or some type of shoulder work, if they do a lot of a laparoscopy. And robotics still has a long way to go to improve ergonomics, but it can, and I think we need to keep pushing that. And I like to learn new things, and I'm generally a contrarian by nature, so once something becomes extremely popular, then I tend to want to try to do something else anyway. So I am that. So that's part of my personality. The platforms, and I've used them all. They've grown from the standard system, and now we're on the fourth generation system, the XI system, which is a whole complement of systems, as Dr. Osorio talked about. It's an XI platform, which has some docking capabilities and table motion, an X platform, which doesn't have the docking and table motion efficiencies, but works very, very similar, and we're actually looking to try to get more of these systems in our hospital. And then the SP platform, which is a single port platform. All of those integrate to one type of console. The console can also be used for training, so you're training on the exact same thing that you would be operating on, and then you have a central brain or the vision cart. And then of course there's instrumentations out there. And if you look at something like bariatric surgery, in the United States at least, we're evolving to more of the fourth generation systems. And what has happened with Intuitive is they've gone from trying to sell a robot and a few instruments to creating a whole system of instruments, instrumentation, and robots, but then making sure that they have appropriate platforms for training and education, which is what I'm going to talk about. And then support and analytics, which is something that everyone wants to talk about more. How can we analyze what we're doing inside the robot, because it's all measurable, and how can we improve our performance by measuring this? So the skills required to do robotic surgery are really kind of divided into 5 areas: learning how to set it up, access and trocar placement, docking in an efficient way, console surgery, learning how to work at the console. And that is a long-term learning curve. You're doing 2 different types of things often when you do surgery. You're learning how to dissect, or dissecting something, and then you're reconstructing something. And there's a little bit different skill sets for both of those. And then also learning how to help at the bedside if you need to do that. And the goal of robotic surgery with a lot of these platforms is to get to the point where bedside assistance is not as important, where you don't need it. There's a lot of cases I do where I don't have a bedside assistant. And as they've added in other instruments such as the stapler, which I showed on the first slide, you can actually do a pretty complex case without any assistance at all. But bedside surgery is still something that needs to be trained, because we were a long ways from having every instrument we need just simply on a robot. How do you define learning? Well, there's 2 things. There's learning curve, or the length of time it takes you to get safe with the robot. That's not a long time. That's 10 to 20 cases by most people's estimation. But then there's the time it takes to get efficient. That does take a long time, and that is a real commitment. And if you're a good laparoscopic surgeon, you're going to have to commit a lot of time to learning robotics before you feel like you can do things faster laparoscopically than you can do robotically. So it is a long haul to get to the point where you feel like you are more efficient with the robot than you are laparoscopically if you have a strong laparoscopic skill set. But I would assure you that if you do plug through that, ultimately, there'll be certain very complex cases that it makes a lot of sense for, but you have to learn the skill set in order to do that. When we're driving it, we have lots of training and cross-training, and where training used to be, okay, I think I want to learn how to use the robot, I go see someone use it, then I go to a course and I learn how to do it on an animal like a pig and maybe a cadaver, and then I go back and I start operating. It's really not that like that anymore. What happens is you start down the process of wanting to learn it, you do a lot of online work, but then you will go see some people do the operation, you will go to a training course, but then you go back, and then you go back again. And the best way to learn robotics is to go and try what you're doing on relatively simple things, come up with the challenges that you're facing, go back to people that have done it, learn more, interact with them more, then go back and do some more, and then slowly work yourself to where you're at a skill set. If you do only very difficult cases with robotics at the very beginning, even though you can do those cases, the simple cases laparoscopically, if you don't do simple cases at the beginning, you will get so frustrated that you'll just fall off of the system and never pursue it. But it's a slow process. It's not a flip of a switch. It is a skill set. Learning to operate in a console is very different than learning to operate laparoscopically, but it does have some advantages once you get there. And if you look at people who go through their learning curve, you see over a long period of time, learning curves continue to improve. Most of the time in robotics, because the technology is still changing, the learning curve doesn't really flatten out. It continues to get better because the technology is continuing to improve. More instrumentation's coming on board. And Mike, this is not my curve. This is a guy named Mark Desagnant, and his learning curve up to 100 cases. But I've been doing it for 15 years, and we're still getting more efficient. So it has not flattened out as far as the efficiency side of things. You have to have a relatively large room for a robot. You have to have an ability to lay out the room in a way that you can move the robot in efficiently. But docking should not take long. Docking is a 2 to 3 minute process maximum. It's just, and once you get practice at it, and you can practice this without a patient over and over again, and that's what we do with the fellows. Learning to place ports. Ports are different when you use the robot than laparoscopically. Usually, for example, if you're doing foregut surgery, laparoscopy, you want to be higher up. You have better angles of attack the higher you are on the abdomen. With robotics, you want to be lower down. And so as you're learning robotics, that's a little bit of a challenge because as you move down, it makes it more difficult to do anything laparoscopically, and sometimes you want to utilize your laparoscopic skill set. So the answer to that is sometimes you put in more ports, but your ports have to be lower robotically so you have more instrument inside the patient and less external movement of the arms outside, and that gives you a lot more freedom. So port placement is different, and there's different types of ports for different types of situations, but with the way the systems have gotten, port placement has gotten quite a bit easier. There's more tolerance the system will tolerate, but a centimeter or two with a robotic port can make a big difference in how comfortable you are, where you can work around it quite easily. Laparoscopically, it can be harder. So port placement is more critical when you use robotics. That includes when you're doing hernias and side docking. And then docking, you can dock all types of cases. There are ways to dock in a way where you can have access to what you need to have access to, both at the bedside and at the head. With all the systems that are out there, even the SI systems, we still have SI systems in our hospital, you can dock over the head with a parallel side dock and have full access to the head. So docking can be learned in an efficient manner. You just have to talk to the right people and learn how to do it. So simulation, we utilize simulation a lot. There's a whole bunch of simulator modules. As Dr. Osorio said, Mimic has made a lot of these. There are other companies now getting into this. Symbionics is doing this as well. And obviously, every new system coming out will have a simulator platform. And the nice thing about these simulators is they are exactly the same as operating with the console. They feel very, very similar. And so we require all our trainees, all our fellows that go through a robotics training to do all of these modules. Every module we can find, we make them do, and we make them get a score of 90% or better, which is an arbitrary score, but a relatively high score. In credentialing, we use simulation now for credentialing, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But we think simulation is a great way to get people up and functioning on the console. And if you're not doing robotics on a regular basis because of how your case volume is flown in, you start it and then you stop and then you start it and you stop, you need to use simulation to keep your console skills efficient so you don't get super slow when you're doing the operations. And simulation has evolved to the point where now you can do procedure-specific simulation, such as this is a lobectomy. So it basically takes you through every step of the operation. You pick instruments, you define dissection planes. All of those things are now being done, and they're working on more and more of procedure-specific simulation, and we are pushing hard for that to be more available in the general surgery subspecialties as well. So. If you have a big robotics program, as you can see, all the surgeons that just do general surgery, we have a whole bunch of other surgeons that do robotics. Our system at Memorial Hermann in Houston is 13 hospitals. We now actually have 15 Da Vincis. I should update that slide. We have some Mako robots, we have a Mazor robot, we have a Rosa robot, which are other registration robots. So we have one system that oversees digital platforms and drives credentialing and drives data review, and we can get more objective data, and that's our goal. We also have a training center where we do a lot of training. We have eight surgical robots there, and training comes in, and it's a convenient place for a lot of people because it's in central U.S. It's convenient to Latin America. It's convenient to most of the United States. So it is something that we utilize a lot, and is a relatively reasonable size. It's not a huge training center, but it does its job, and one room is pretty much dedicated to robotics. So who do we train in our institution? We train all our minimally invasive fellows, whether they're colorectal, bariatric, foregut. We train all our residents at the 4th year level at minimum. We've had a robot for the last year in our public hospital system, which is a change. So now we're bringing the training down to the 2nd year residents. We haven't gotten the interns involved yet, but we're getting closer. So the 2nd year residents are doing it. They all do the same process. They do an online modules completion. They all have to do those online modules. They do a docking training practicum where they learn how to dock, and then they race each other on how quickly they can dock and how efficient they can do it safely, and then they race us. Then they complete all the simulator modules with a score of 90% or better. Once they do that, then we'll do a lab with them. And then we expect them to do at least 10 bedside cases and 20 cases as a consult surgeon before we'll sign off on them and say they've been robotically trained. And then we'll send a letter out from the program director that they've achieved that, and they'll also get a certificate from the company. We've been trying to expand this into the Bariatric Society in the U.S., ASMBS, and we're still fighting with the political aspects of this, but we want to do the exact same thing, have a program for all bariatric fellows and foregut fellows out there where they would have a similar type process. And if they're in an environment where they don't have a lot of faculty that are doing robotic surgery, they can still go through this process and hopefully get to the point where they could go out and be more ready to do robotic surgery when they get out into practice. We do have credentialing criteria. I won't stress this too much, but one of the things we have added on, which took a real political battle, was if you weren't doing a case on a regular basis, like a case a month. So if you do less than 12 cases a year, you go back and you do the simulator every year. And if you don't do the simulator every year, you don't keep your credentials in robotics. That was a hard thing to fight for. The gynecologists, honestly, were the ones that pushed back the most on it. But they are now engaged in that. If you do more than 36 cases a year, more than 3 a month, you don't have to do the simulator at all. If you're between that, you do it every 2 years. And that's a small change that we've made to try to drive better outcomes, because we've correlated and looked at long operative times with the robot and how they do on the simulator, and it correlates as you would expect. People who do less well and have lower scores on the simulator, their operative times are longer, they use more instruments than they really need to oftentimes, and their complication rate's higher, and their cost is higher. So it makes sense that if you stay engaged with the training process and continue to work on your education with robotics, that you can have better outcomes. So that's what we're doing. And we can get data like this. This is one small example. We're getting more surgeon-specific data now in our institution, which has also required a lot of political work to do that, to look at operative times, outcomes, tying those to instrument usage. And what we're going to do is take the people that are doing, the surgeons that have the best utilization as far as times, instrument usage, they're the most efficient, and have them teach all of us how they do it, and hopefully we can drive everything towards a higher goal. We're not really hoping to use it as a way to stop people from operating at this point in time. We want to use it from a positive approach. So as you can take all that information that sits in the computer, this is what Google and Verb wants to do. This is what every robotic company, now at my meeting that I have, every robotic company talks about how important data analytics is. And what the intention would be is you take these movements, you correlate them with outcomes, you correlate them with length of stay and complication rate, and you develop algorithms that can look at movements and identify movements that are associated with better outcomes and those that are associated with less better outcomes, and then start trying to grade surgeons as they're actually doing the operation. That is where we're headed, and we just have to be ready for that. So I think, to summarize, training surgical robotics has evolved a lot. It's a continuous journey. You have to make a continual commitment to it, and you have to evolve with the technology. And it's just like surgery. We never stop learning, and that applies to robotics. And general surgery and its specialties will require, and already do require, refined skills in open, laparoscopic, robotic, and endoluminal approaches. And my blatant plug is we do have a meeting that's specifically dedicated to just surgical innovation and surgical disruptive technology. We'll have most of the robotic companies that Santi will talk about and Dr. Osura will talk about will be there in panels. We have it in March. It's in Houston at the time of the rodeo, so that you can go to the rodeo as well. And y'all are all welcome to come and hear from all the companies about how they intend to evolve robotics. Thank you.